How do we define home? For most of us, home is supposed to be a sanctuary. It is the place where we expect to feel safest, where the people who raised us are supposed to protect us, lift us up, and teach us how to stand on our own 2 feet. But for many, the reality inside those walls is very different. Instead of a sanctuary, home becomes a maze of unspoken rules, conditional love, and subtle manipulation. We are taught from a very young age to trust our family unconditionally. So when a parent, a sibling, or a relative uses guilt, gaslighting, or emotional control against us, our brains do something dangerous to survive. We blame ourselves. We assume that if the people who are supposed to love us the most are making us feel small, then we must actually be small. This is how the cycle begins. It starts when we trade our authentic selves just to keep the peace. To break this cycle, we have to look at the root cause. Family manipulation is rarely about malice. It is almost always about a desperate, deeply ingrained need for control. When a family system relies on manipulation, it is because the individuals within it do not know how to connect through vulnerable, honest communication. They use guilt to keep you close because they fear abandonment. They rewrite history, telling you you are too sensitive or remembering things incorrectly because looking at their own actions is too painful. Healing does not start by confronting them and demanding they change. If you wait for a manipulator to validate your pain, you will be waiting forever. Healing starts when you change your response to the system. It begins when you realize that you can love your family from a distance while fiercely protecting your inner peace. Reclaiming your inner power requires setting boundaries, and a boundary is not an ultimatum to change someone else's behavior. A boundary is a clear declaration of what you will do to protect your own well-being. It is saying, I love you, but I will not stay in this room if you continue to speak to me this way. It is refusing to participate in the old scripts. When you stop playing your assigned role in the family drama, the entire dynamic is forced to shift. You finally step out of the maze and begin to live an authentic life rooted in your own truth. Keynotes of the speech, the illusion of the sanctuary, recognizing that systemic family manipulation forces individuals to sacrifice their authenticity and self-trust early in life just to maintain emotional safety. The root of manipulation, understanding that emotional control and guilt within families stem from the manipulator's own deep-seated fears of abandonment and an inability to communicate vulnerably. The trap of seeking validation, realizing that true healing cannot depend on the manipulator acknowledging their behavior or apologizing for the past. Redefining boundaries, shifting the perception of boundaries from attempts to control others to actionable commitments that protect one's own emotional space. Reclaiming authentic power, breaking the multi-generational cycle by refusing to play the traditional, manipulated role, thereby forcing a shift in the entire family dynamic. The concept of home is one of the most powerful foundational structures in human psychology. From the moment we are born, we look to our immediate family units to define what safety looks like, what love feels like, and who we are allowed to be in the world. In an ideal ecosystem, a family functions as a launch pad, a secure base where a child is accepted unconditionally and encouraged to explore their individuality. However, when systemic manipulation is embedded into the fabric of a family, this fundamental sanctuary transforms into an elaborate illusion. Instead of being a safe harbor where you can develop a robust sense of self-trust, the home becomes a highly transactional environment. In this environment, emotional safety is not a given. It is a currency that must be constantly earned, usually at the direct expense of your own authenticity. To understand how this illusion operates, we have to look at the silent trade-off that occurs in early childhood. Children have a biological imperative to attach to their primary caregivers for survival. Because a child's mind cannot process the idea that their caretakers might be emotionally unsafe or deeply flawed, the child will always choose to protect the relationship over protecting themselves. When a parent or relative uses subtle manipulation, such as guilt trips, conditional affection, or shifting expectations, the child quickly learns that showing their true feelings, setting a boundary, or expressing an independent thought threatens that vital attachment. To maintain the illusion of a peaceful sanctuary, the individual makes a devastating subconscious deal. They agree to bury their authentic personality, their true desires, and their emotional boundaries. They trade their internal truth for external acceptance, molding themselves into whoever the family needs them to be just to keep the peace. As this pattern repeats over years, the manipulation erodes the most critical tool a human being possesses: self-trust. In a manipulative family system, reality is constantly destabilized. If you express hurt, you are told you are being too sensitive. If you point out an unfair dynamic, the history is rewritten, leaving you questioning your own memory and perception of events. This consistent undermining forces you to outsource your validation. You stop listening to your own intuition because your environment has taught you that your intuition is wrong, disruptive, or dangerous. You begin to look at the people manipulating you to decide if you are good, if you are worthy, and if your feelings are valid. The tragedy of the illusion of the sanctuary is that the very place designed to teach you how to trust yourself ends up teaching you how to second-guess your own reality. Living within this illusion creates a state of perpetual hypervigilance. Even as adults, individuals who grew up in these dynamics often find themselves reading the room for microscopic shifts in energy, anticipating moods, and instinctively stepping into the role of the fixer or the people pleaser. You become an expert at managing the emotions of everyone else while completely disconnecting from your own. The internal power that should be driving your passions, your decisions, and your personal growth is instead entirely consumed by the exhausting work of maintaining the family's fragile emotional equilibrium. Breaking free from this specific keynote requires a profound realization: you cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick by playing by the exact same rules. Recognizing that the sanctuary was an illusion is incredibly painful because it forces you to mourn the family support system you deserve but never actually had. Yet, acknowledging this truth is the exact moment the illusion loses its power over you. By admitting that the environment required you to shrink to fit inside it, you finally give yourself permission to step outside of it, reclaim your stolen self-trust, and begin building a genuine sense of inner power that no one else can dictate or take away. To truly break a destructive cycle, we have to look past the surface behaviors and investigate the underlying mechanics of why people manipulate. It is incredibly easy to look at a family member who uses guilt, gaslighting, or emotional control and label them as inherently malicious or calculated. However, a deeper, more objective analysis reveals a fundamental truth about human systems. Family manipulation is rarely driven by a conscious desire to cause harm. Instead, it is almost always driven by a desperate, deeply ingrained need for control, which itself is a direct byproduct of profound fear. When a family dynamic relies on manipulation, it indicates a structural failure within the ecosystem. It means the individuals within that system completely lack the emotional tools required to build deep, authentic connections through vulnerable, honest communication. The primary engine behind this behavior is an overwhelming, often subconscious fear of abandonment or loss. In a healthy relationship, closeness is maintained through mutual respect, open dialogue, and emotional freedom. But to an emotionally underdeveloped family member, another person's independence feels like a direct threat to their own stability. They do not know how to say, "I miss you," or "I feel disconnected from you, and I am afraid of losing our bond." Because vulnerability feels too dangerous and exposes their own insecurities, they translate that fear into control. They use guilt as an anchor to drag you back into their orbit. Phrases like, "After everything I've done for you," or "You only care about yourself," are not reflections of your character. They are desperate emotional levers pulled to ensure you stay close enough to soothe their anxiety. The manipulation is a clumsy, dysfunctional attempt to force closeness because they do not believe they are capable of inspiring closeness naturally. Furthermore, this desperate need for control manifests as a complete rewriting of shared reality, commonly known as gaslighting. When a manipulator tells you that you are remembering things incorrectly or that you are simply being too sensitive, it is not necessarily a calculated plot to drive you mad. More often, it is a psychological defense mechanism designed to protect their own fragile ego. To acknowledge that they have hurt you would force them to look into a mirror and confront their own flaws, failures, and deep-seated pain. For many individuals, that level of self-reflection is entirely terrifying. Their psychological survival depends on them being the victim or the hero of every story, but never the villain. Therefore, to protect their own internal narrative, they must change yours. They project their own unresolved trauma, shame, and inadequacy onto you, turning your reality upside down so that they never have to face their own. When you begin to view family manipulation through this educational lens, the entire dynamic changes. You stop taking the manipulation personally. You realize that the critical remarks, the heavy sighs, the emotional cold shoulders, and the conditional affection are not accurate report cards of your value as a human being. Instead, they are reflections of the manipulator's own internal chaos and emotional limitations. They are operating from a place of scarcity, reacting to old wounds that likely predate your entire existence. This realization is incredibly liberating because it shifts your perspective from anger and confusion to profound clarity. You understand that you cannot reason someone out of a behavior that they are using to survive their own internal fears. By understanding the root of the manipulation, you stop waiting for them to suddenly develop the emotional maturity they clearly do not possess. You realize that their behavior is a fixed pattern driven by their own unresolved history. And this clarity gives you the leverage you need to stop participating in the dynamic entirely. One of the most agonizing traps on the path to healing from family manipulation is the deeply held belief that closure requires the manipulator to understand what they did. When we are hurt by the people who are supposed to protect us, our natural human instinct is to seek justice, validation, and an apology. We want them to look us in the eyes, acknowledge the pain they caused, and finally see our reality. This desire is completely understandable, but within a dysfunctional family system, it is a dangerous illusion that keeps you tethered to the very cycle you are trying to escape. If you condition your healing on a manipulator validating your pain, you are handing them the keys to your emotional freedom. You are essentially deciding that you cannot be whole until the person who broke you agrees to fix you. To understand why this trap is so effective, we must look at the psychological friction it creates within the victim. When you try to confront a manipulative family member with the truth of their actions, you are expecting a level of emotional maturity that they simply do not possess. If they were capable of reflecting on their behavior, validating your feelings, and prioritizing your emotional well-being over their own ego, they wouldn't have resorted to manipulation in the first place. When you present them with evidence of their hurtful behavior, they do not experience a sudden moment of clarity. Instead, their psychological defense mechanisms immediately activate. They will deny, deflect, flip the narrative to make themselves the victim, or attack your character to discredit your perspective. By entering into this negotiation for validation, You are stepping right back into the maze, allowing them to manipulate your reality all over again. True healing cannot begin until you radically accept that the validation you are seeking will never come. Radical acceptance does not mean condoning what they did, nor does it mean pretending that the pain doesn't exist. It means accepting reality exactly as it is, without trying to fight it or change it. It means looking at a manipulative parent or relative and realizing that they are emotionally bankrupt in that specific area, and you cannot draw water from an empty well. When you stop demanding that they see your truth, you instantly strip them of their power over your future. You stop wasting your precious cognitive and emotional energy trying to construct the perfect argument that will finally make them understand. You realize that their inability to see your pain is not a reflection of your worth or the validity of your experience. It is a reflection of their own emotional blindness. Stepping out of this trap shifts your entire focus from the external world to your internal world. Instead of trying to force them to change their mind, you begin the profound work of validating yourself. You become the custodian of your own reality. When a memory arises of a manipulative event, you no longer look around the room for a family member to agree that it happened. You stand firmly in your own truth and say to yourself, I know what I experienced, I know it was wrong, and I don't need anyone else's permission to heal from it. This internal shift is incredibly empowering because it moves you from a state of passive waiting to a state of active reclamation. You stop being a victim waiting for an apology and start being an adult taking responsibility for your own emotional ecosystem. The moment you let go of the need for their validation, the family dynamic loses its emotional leverage over you. They can no longer use your desire for their approval or their understanding as a hook to pull you back into the old dysfunctional scripts. You are no longer performing for an audience that refuses to applaud. You acknowledge that the apology is never coming, the accountability will never be taken, and the past cannot be rewritten. By mourning the relationship you wished you had, you finally clear the space to build the life you actually deserve, one rooted entirely in your own authentic self-trust. The foundational mistake we make when trying to protect our peace within a dysfunctional family is completely misunderstanding what a boundary actually is. Most of us are conditioned to view a boundary as a verbal confrontation, a dramatic line drawn in the sand where we demand that someone else change their behavior, stop treating us poorly, or finally respect our wishes. We go into these interactions expecting the other person to cooperate, and when they inevitably push back, ignore the boundary, or mock us, we feel defeated, powerless, and deeply frustrated. This happens because we have mistaken an ultimatum for a boundary. An ultimatum is an attempt to control someone else's behavior, which is a losing battle against a manipulator. A true boundary, when understood from a position of authentic inner power, has absolutely nothing to do with controlling the other person. It is entirely about controlling your own actions and protecting your own emotional ecosystem. To look at this through an educational lens, we must understand that boundaries are not walls built to punish others, but rather rules of engagement designed to preserve your own integrity. When you set a boundary, you are not saying, you must stop being manipulative. You are saying, you can act however you choose, but I will no longer participate in this specific dynamic. The focus shifts entirely from their input to your output. For example, instead of wasting energy begging a family member to stop shouting at you or criticizing your life choices during a phone call, a true boundary looks like saying calmly, I am going to hang up the phone now if this tone continues. If they continue to shout, you do not argue, you do not explain yourself further, and you do not wait for permission. You simply hang up the phone. The power of the boundary does not rely on their agreement. It relies entirely on your execution. This shift in definition requires a radical reclamation of personal agency. In a manipulative family system, you are trained to believe that your emotional state is entirely dependent on how the family treats you. When you redefine boundaries as your own actionable commitments, you break that dependency. You stop being a passive reactor to their chaos and become an active manager of your own space. You realize that you cannot stop a relative from launching into a guilt trip, but you possess the absolute authority to physically walk out of the room, leave the dinner table, or limit the frequency of your visits. You are no longer trying to change the script of the family drama. You are simply refusing to step onto the stage and play your assigned character. Implementing these structural boundaries will inevitably cause friction within the family system. Manipulators rely on the predictability of your old reactions, your defensiveness, your explanations, or your compliance. When you suddenly replace those predictable reactions with calm, decisive consequences, the system experiences a profound shock. They may escalate the manipulation, accuse you of being cold, or use other family members to pressure you into falling back into line. This is the ultimate test of the boundary. A boundary only works if you are willing to enforce it even when it makes others uncomfortable, angry, or disappointed. You must become entirely willing to prioritize your own emotional survival over the comfort of a dysfunctional system. By shifting the definition of boundaries from an attempt to fix others to a commitment to protect yourself, you reclaim your inner power. You stop operating from a place of anger and start operating from a place of quiet strength. You no longer need to win an argument or prove a point to anyone. You understand that your peace of mind is your most valuable asset, and you are the only one responsible for guarding it. This realization completely changes your energetic posture. You are no longer entering family interactions as a vulnerable child hoping they will treat you well. You are entering as an autonomous adult who knows exactly what they will tolerate and exactly what they will do if those terms are violated. The ultimate realization on the journey of healing from family manipulation is understanding that a dysfunctional family system operates exactly like an intricately rehearsed theatrical play. Every member of the family is unconsciously assigned a specific character role designed to keep the status quo intact and maintain the fragile emotional equilibrium of the system. There is often the golden child, the scapegoat, the enabler, the fixer, or the quiet observer. These roles are forced upon us early in life, and the script dictates exactly how we are supposed to react to guilt, how we are supposed to absorb blame, and when we are supposed to sacrifice our own needs to manage the anxiety of others. Reclaiming your authentic power means recognizing that you do not have to spend the rest of your life playing the character you were assigned. The moment you choose to stop reading from the family script, you instantly disrupt the entire production, forcing a profound, unavoidable shift in the structural dynamic of the family. When you step out of your assigned role, the immediate reaction of the family system is almost always panic. Systems naturally crave stability, even if that stability is rooted in toxic and manipulative behaviors. For years, the family relied on your predictable responses, your compliance, your defensiveness, or your willingness to absorb their emotional projections to keep the system functioning. When you suddenly replace those old, predictable reactions with absolute calm, clarity, and firm boundaries, the old machinery stops working. The gears of manipulation require your active participation to grind forward. They need you to argue, to feel guilty, or to beg for approval. When you refuse to provide that emotional fuel, the manipulator is left holding their own unresolved chaos. By choosing authenticity over artificial peace, you are essentially holding up a mirror to the family, forcing them to confront the reality that their old tactics no longer have any leverage over you. This act of reclamation requires a deep internal shift in how you view your identity. For a long time, your sense of self was likely defined by a mission, by who you had to pretend to be in order to survive the family environment. Reclaiming your inner power means systematically stripping away those survival mechanisms and uncovering your true, unmanipulated self. It means deciding that your own truth, your own peace, and your own mental health are infinitely more valuable than maintaining the illusion of a happy family unit. You begin to make choices based on your actual values, desires, and goals rather than making choices out of a fear of family disapproval or a sense of manufactured obligation. You stop asking for permission to live your life, and you start taking complete ownership of your destiny. This phase of healing is fundamentally about breaking a multi-generational chain. In many cases, the manipulation you experienced was passed down through generations. Your parents or relatives are simply running the dysfunctional scripts that were inflicted upon them when they were young. By standing up, setting boundaries, and refusing to participate in the drama, you are deciding that the trauma stops with you. You are choosing to be the circuit breaker in your family line. This is not an act of malice or abandonment. It is the highest form of self-respect and ultimately the most profound act of leadership you can demonstrate. You are showing everyone in the system and anyone who comes after you that it is entirely possible to walk away from manipulation and build a life rooted in genuine self-trust. Stepping out of the maze allows you to finally breathe as a fully autonomous adult. You no longer enter family interactions with the anxious anticipation of a child trying to avoid a trap. Instead, you navigate the world with the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are. Your emotional state is no longer held hostage by a relative's mood swing, a passive-aggressive comment, or a silent treatment. You have reclaimed your stolen inner power, anchoring it firmly within yourself rather than outsourcing it to people who cannot appreciate it. By refusing to play your assigned role, you cross the finish line of your healing journey, stepping fully into an authentic life defined entirely by your own terms, your own truth, and your own peace. Ultimately, breaking the cycle of family manipulation is not about changing the people who hurt you. It is about changing your relationship to the system they created. It is the painful but necessary journey of realizing that the sanctuary you were promised was an illusion, understanding that their control stems from their own deep-seated fears, and accepting that the validation or apology you deserve is never coming. True power is reclaimed the moment you stop trying to fix the old script and instead choose to walk off the stage entirely. When you define boundaries by your own actions rather than their compliance, and when you refuse to play your assigned role in the family drama, you finally break a multi-generational chain of trauma. You step out of the maze of conditional love and into the freedom of your own truth. Healing does not mean the absence of the past. It means the presence of your own authentic self, standing firmly in your own power and living a life defined entirely by your own peace.